Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today we'll be discussing the recent revolution in Egypt, in which over 30 million Egyptians took to the streets all across Egypt to denounce and protest against President Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood that saw him deposed. And in this programme today we'll be asking, what does the future hold for Egyptian Christians? My guests for today's programme are Mervyn Thomas, who's the Chief Executive of Christian Solidarity Worldwide, and Pastor Waggy from the Arabic Evangelical Church here in London. So it's great to have you both on the Middle East Report discussing the very important topic of Egypt. Mervyn, it's been a while since you've been on the Middle East Report, so it's good to have you back. Can you share with us, with our viewers, some of the projects you're involved in and some of the excellent work you're doing on behalf of Christian Solidarity Worldwide?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here again, Simon. And yeah, of course, CSW is involved as an advocacy organisation. We speak up for those who are persecuted for their faith around the world, and not just Christians, although we're a Christian organisation, but we fully believe in freedom of religion. And our current campaign actually is called Operation 18, based on the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18, which gives freedom which is the freedom of religion clause. And the right to choose one's religion is what we're focusing on this year. Of course, millions of people around the world are unable to exercise their freedom of faith in a way that we can in this country. Probably something like 100 to 200 million Christians who are overtly persecuted for their faith in about 60 countries. So we want to, and particularly if they are in Islamic countries, the difficulties of becoming a Christian and converting from Islam to Christianity are huge. And so, but Article 18 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights allows for that change, for a person to change one's religion. What usually Muslims mean when they agree to sign up to that clause is that, yes, they agree with the right of people to change their religion to Islam, but not the other way. We believe it should go both ways. And so Operation 18, we're trying to get thousands of people to sign a petition to Baroness Varsi to get the British government to treat religious freedom more seriously.
Yeah, well, let's hope they do, because it's a very, very good campaign, very worthwhile. And Pastor Waggy, it's about a year ago that you were on. I think we did an Egyptian special looking at the election victory of President Morsi. Can you share what it's like as an Egyptian Christian, to live in Egypt, and your own experiences of being a Christian in Egypt?
Yeah, thank you to have me again in the program. Actually, since what happened in 2011, there is a big change, made the church more stronger and Christians more faithful, as they were under more difficulties. And the church gathered more and prayed more. So spiritually, the Christians are growing in faith, and conversion are in a big numbers. So there is a lot of difficulties and persecution, but the faith growing under this kind of persecution.
That's good. I mean, we've seen kind of monumentous events occur in Egypt, certainly since with the big protest that led to President Mubarak being deposed in office, and then Egypt had its first multi-party presidential elections and parliamentary elections, in which the Muslim Brotherhood won the presidency with their president, President Morsi. But how has life for ordinary Christians been under the Muslim Brotherhood?
Actually, it become much worse than the Mubarak regime. is not only for Christians but as well for any Egyptians except Muslim Brotherhood. So it become like a country on the hand of few or a small group of people. Since Morsi had the constitutional declaration giving himself the power over all the main streams in the country, so he become the only person who can take ecumenical decision, any political decision, any anything. Even you said about the parliament. The parliament was dismissed, so he become he had the authority to deal instead of the parliament. He had the authority to deal instead of constitution itself. He formed the constitutional committee, and the constitutional committee were only Muslim Brotherhood. So everything went from worse to worse, and actually Christians were kidnapped and couldn't run any kind of business or any kind of life. But as I said, it's not only Christians, but mostly all Egyptians.
Yeah. And Mervyn, your organisation is very, very good at highlighting the persecutions of Christians throughout the world and also in the Middle East as well. But when it comes down to Egypt, what have your concerns as an organisation been under the persecution of Christians under the government of the Muslim Brotherhood?
Yes, well, of course, Christians have always been persecuted in Egypt, and the church, if we go back many years, the church was started by St. Thomas, who was dragged through the streets of Alexandria by his neck, and so the church was born out of persecution and has continued to be persecuted. But as Pastor Waggy has been saying, is absolutely right. The persecution was nowhere near as bad as it's been over the last year. And if we remember back to the elections, when President Morsi was elected, he talked about an inclusive. He wanted an inclusive Egypt where Christians and minorities and women were treated as equals. What has happened in the last year has been the complete opposite. We've seen more attacks on Christians, on churches, on individual Christians than we'd seen for years under the Mubarak regime. So great concern that President Morsi was not acting upon the words that he spoke about before he came into power. The complete opposite, in fact.
We've got a news clip to go to now that highlights a report by Amnesty International warning about the plight of persecution of Christians in Egypt, particularly the Coptic Christians, and this was before the revolution of the 30th of June 2013.
Amid a rising wave of persecution of Egypt's Coptic Christians, human rights group Amnesty International has called on the Islamist government to do more to protect the minority community. In a statement, Hasiba Haj Sarawi, the director for the Middle East and North Africa, said Coptic Christians across Egypt face discrimination in law and practice and have been victims of regular sectarian attacks while authorities systematically look the other way. The situation has gotten considerably worse now that Islamist President Mohamed Morsi took over the country after the 2011 Arab Spring revolutions ousted secular leader Hosni Mubarak. Recently, an Egyptian court sentenced a Muslim man to death for killing 2 Christians. However, many other incidents have gone unpunished. Many attacks target churches, which is especially difficult for the community to deal with because they require government-issued permits to repair or build new churches, which are often withheld by local authorities. Physical violence against the Christians has also been increasing, and reports have surfaced the Christians are being beaten and their property vandalized on an increasingly regular basis. In 2011, it emerged that security forces fired live rounds into an October protest in Cairo, killing an estimated 24 people, the majority of whom were Copts. Female Christians in Egypt are especially vulnerable, and young Coptic women are sometimes abducted and forced to legally convert to Islam and marry Muslim men, a process which is very difficult to reverse in Egypt unless you can afford legal representation. President Morsi has promised to protect the Copts, which make up roughly 10% of Egypt's 83 million people. However, his current track record since taking power last year is less than promising.
Welcome back to the Middle East reports. Pastor Waggy, we saw in that clip really did highlight the persecutions of Christians under the Muslim Brotherhood. And it's very hard for us Christians here living in Britain and living in the West to kind of really identify with the persecution. And there's been a new book here, according to my notes, by Raymond Ibrahim. He writes a book called Crucified Again, Exposing Islam's War on Christians. And he writes that over the last few years, there's been 550 cases of abductions, entrapments, rape and forced conversions of women that's been documented in Egypt. Why are we seeing an increase in persecution against Christians in Egypt?
Actually, there is two issues. The first is when an Islamic country or Islamic regime come to a country like what's happened in Egypt. Islam believe that they are not only a religion but also a state. So the state has to be fulfilled in the country. And the state of Islam, anyone non-Muslim is second or third citizenship. So has no rights to be in different places like army or police or any critical position. So that's the general idea of when you have an Islamic regime, the Islamic regime has to take it this way because of the divine state. And that's, can be practiced anywhere, even the West. And you can look at the Turkey example. But anyway, there is a doctrine in Islam called taqiyya.
Oh, yes.
So taqiyya means to be as nice as possible till you get the power. So when you get the power, you can do whatever you want. So generally, when the Islam come to be in the position, they will force people either to be a Muslim or to leave as second or third citizenship or to die. And second citizenship means a lot. It's not, needs a lot of explanations. The other thing why that's happened in Egypt, because the Muslim Brotherhood, since they started in 1928, they were underground movement, and they had no power at all. They were all the time the people are in prisons, or they all the time need the human rights to call for their rights and all these kind of things. And suddenly, what happened in Egypt? They took the power. They took the power because Egyptians are religious by nature. And in their main theme, Muslim Brotherhood main theme, where Islam is the solution. And they were calling people, saying to them, if you vote for us, you are voting for Islam. So the grassroots were going to them by millions because they are voting for Islam. And so suddenly these unexperienced people become in power and find themselves have all the authorities. They didn't know how to deal with it. So all the all the bad attitudes, if I can say, come out against Christians and against infidels in their eyes. So they called most of the, even Morsi himself in the last speech, he was calling the protesters will go out on the 30th. At that time, they were going out 2 days after. Infidels.
That's 30 million Egyptians. He's
Over 30 million Egyptians. He couldn't believe it because you will not find in the history a petition signed by 22 millions. He thought it will go like the others before, because during the year, he had only 1 year, over 42 times people protested against him in a year. So he saw that that's another one.
Yeah. And Mervyn, I just want to just draw your attention to some individual cases that have happened over the past year in Egypt. Firstly, there was a case in June before the recent revolution, which a 6-year-old Coptic boy named Cyril Youssef Saad was kidnapped and held for ransom for the sum of 30,000 Egyptian pounds. The family paid off the Islamist kidnapper, only for him to actually murder this innocent boy, in which they threw his body into the toilet of his home, where his body was left in a terrible condition before the family found him. There was another case of a 14-year-old girl, Sarah Abdul Malek, who was abducted on her way to school and then smuggled to neighbouring Libya with the help of the Egyptian Interior Ministry. Now, why isn't there been such international outrage as some of these horrendous abuses of Christians in Egypt, and pretty much why is the mainstream media not reported some of these stories?
Well, I think it's a struggle we in CSW face daily, not just in Egypt, but elsewhere in the world. The persecution of Christians is of very little interest, it appears, to the world's media. And so there are many places where horrific things are going on, far more horrific even than the cases that you've mentioned there, which don't even justify a column inch in our newspapers. They're much more interested in what's going on in the lives of celebrities and all of the sleaze and that. They're not interested in this kind of thing. So it's always an uphill struggle. With regards to Egypt, I think obviously Egypt is such a strategic country in the world as regards peace in the Middle East, and I think it probably is. For example, the US government might be inclined to turn a blind eye to these things rather than to offend the Egyptian government. And it's always been very sad to me that these cases of and it isn't just Christian persecution. There have been cases in Egypt recently of Shiite Muslims who have been attacked in that country because they're not part of the Sunni majority. And so yes, I mean, and religious freedom is such a key thing in the world today, Simon.
Absolutely.
And most people in the world have got some kind of religious faith, some kind of belief. And so that's why we believe that freedom of religion and belief is one of the key litmus tests to democracy, to good government. If you get freedom of religion right, if you're a government and you're a nation that respects freedom of religion, you'll usually find that you've got good, stable government, and even if you've got a government in power that you don't believe in or don't agree with politically, at least you've got that basic freedom of religion, and that's something that sadly is not the case in Egypt. It's something that President Morsi did talk about at the beginning. We don't want special rights for Christians. Let's put this straight. We don't want Christians to be treated any differently to anybody else, but we do want them to have the right to practice their faith freely. Christians in Egypt want to be good Egyptian citizens. They don't want to be looked at even as Christians or Muslims. They want to be Egyptian citizens, and they want to be respected for that fact.
No, absolutely, and it's very important that we highlight their plight. Pastor Waggy, we had monumentous events that occurred on the 30th of June this year, in which 30 million Egyptians all across Egypt took to the streets. And there's an incredible number of people to protest against President Morsi. That included 8 million Christians as well. How did President Morsi isolate and marginalized 30 million people?
Actually, for the whole time, the whole year, he was speaking to only his people, and he called them my family or my tribe. So he used to speak to only Muslim Brotherhood, and he was, he thought, and the Muslim Brotherhood thought as well, that they are, gaining more population through what they are doing. But unfortunately, it was completely the opposite.
Yeah.
Actually, he was denying the truth. He was denying the reality, and unfortunately, that was because of the support of other countries like the U.S. and some European countries. And with this support, they felt like they are. Yeah, this picture is fantastic. I was shocked when just 2 million went out on the streets against Mubarak, and the West called it revolution, and they called it the Arabic Spring. But when 33 million went out on the street, they called it coup.
A coup, yeah.
Military coup. Unbelievable, because that's not a military. What you're seeing here, all these people around, even in the small streets, you will see people everywhere protesting. And during that day, the 30th of June, 30 million or over were all over Egypt. And you will hear no one injured, no one killed. Nothing happened. Just the day after, you will hear about the killing and the blood because Morsi called his people on the 28th to kill whoever will be against Islam, the infidels. So he thought he is in holy war against non-Muslims or non-real Muslims.
Yeah. In other words, Muslims who are not actually members of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes.
Mervyn Thomas, we had an interesting conversation before the start of the programme, and you compared really to Margaret Thatcher and the poll tax demonstrations, and the fact that if we had 30 million people turn out in the streets of Britain to protest against the government, it would be incredible. So why are we seeing these protests really not presented in the light as they actually are? It's seen as a military coup rather than the people rising up against the Islamization of Egypt.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think the West is beginning to realise the enormity of this. But you're right. What I referred to earlier when we were talking was, the poll tax, whilst it didn't directly bring down Margaret Thatcher, it virtually did. It signalled the end of her premiership, a long premiership, a very popular prime minister in many quarters. But we saw thousands of people take to the streets. Not even 1 million, but thousands of people take to the streets of Britain in protest at the poll tax, and it was on our television screens every night, and we were horrified by that. Something has to change, people said. But here we've got a third of the population of a country. So let's say 20 million people came out onto the streets of the UK, and what happened in Egypt was the military. In fact, the military didn't step in immediately. They gave Morsi several deadlines, said talk to the opposition, do something about this. Can't you see the enormity of the situation? And he did nothing. What did the military do? They stepped in, they removed Morsi, but they didn't take power for themselves. A military coup is when the army takes control. Yeah. They didn't. They immediately handed over to civilians to say, to form a government, an interim government, which is what we've got now. And I noticed even this week that, there is at least one Christian cabinet minister being appointed in this interim government with a clear roadmap to elections early in the new year and then presidential elections, a new constitution. It's the power of the people and not just a vociferous few. We always get a vociferous few on the streets about anything. This is, and let me remind you too, or remind the listeners that this petition wasn't just signed by any Tom, Dick and Harry. These people wrote their names on the petition, plus their identity card numbers. They were there standing up to be counted, and the military did the right thing. And I believe that the British and American governments are beginning to see now that this isn't a coup, but this is a response to the popular will of the Egyptians.
Yeah. And we've got a clip to go to that's entitled now, Egypt's Christians are hopeful despite an uncertain future.
On a leading member of the Muslim Brotherhood. The government's prosecutor has ordered the arrest of the Brotherhood's spiritual leader and not 9 other top Islamists.
The government says they may have started the violence Monday that killed 54 people. The move comes as Egyptians are divided about their future. Chris Mitchell brings us the story from Cairo.
This is Tahrir Square, the epicenter of the huge demonstrations that have taken place in the past few weeks. Here, Egyptians have gathered by the millions and changed the course of Egypt's history.
Change the atmosphere as if you are breathing a new air, a fresh air, freedom.
Pastor Sami Taufik of the El Deborah Evangelical Church just outside of Tahrir Square describes the events of the past few weeks as nothing short of miraculous.
For me, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's God's hands. Nobody can do that. We could see God's hands in the first revolution, the 25th of January, but this time we see it more clearly.
In another part of Cairo, Father Antoni Grish, the spokesman of Egypt's Catholic Church, also says he sees the hand of God.
We consider the dismissal of Morsi and his party, his community, his Muslim Brotherhood, is really a miracle. It was the hand of God, because one day before his dismissal, we could never think or dream that he would leave. So it is the hand of God. We see it clearly.
He says the Muslim Brotherhood wanted to establish an Islamic caliphate and change Egypt.
The Muslim Brotherhood who were trying to steal Egypt. Now all the Christians and the Egyptians will tell you, now we regained Egypt as we know it. That everybody is free.
Yet that freedom's future is uncertain. Whether or not the Muslim Brotherhood will continue to reject the new government or even begin a new violent intifada remains to be seen. That's why Christians throughout Egypt are asking for prayer for Egypt's future.
Well, Chris Mitchell is with us now from Tahrir Square in Cairo. And Chris, tell me about this uprising. Was it against the Brotherhood, against Morsi? How do you read it?
I think it was against the Muslim Brotherhood, Pat, and Morsi himself. I think some people have described the past year with Morsi as a nightmare, and I think it was a complete rejection of what the Muslim Brotherhood wanted to do, is what many people have said to me, establish an Islamic theocracy. That's been their goal since they were established in 1928. They tried to do that in Egypt, and I think what's happened here is a complete rejection. Why there were maybe 30 million people here in Tahrir Square and throughout Egypt on June 30th. Many people here in Egypt consider that sort of their July 4th, when they threw off the yoke of the Muslim Brotherhood and established what they hope is a new dawn of freedom.
What about their reaction to Obama and America? What are they telling you?
Well, what they're telling me, Pat, is they're sad, they're disappointed, and very perplexed why the Obama administration would be supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. They say that, you know, the United States, which represents freedom and democracy, but yet it didn't support freedom and democracy here in Egypt. They say, why does it fight terrorism in Afghanistan and then finance terrorism here in Egypt, which they consider the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization? Just below me, Pat, in Tahrir Square, you can signs that say Obama supports terrorism. And also the U.S. ambassador to Egypt, Ann Patterson, is somebody that really has engendered a lot of anger here in Egypt because they believe that she has supported the Muslim Brotherhood. She's met with the Muslim Brotherhood leaders and Salafists, another radical Islamic party, and yet marginalized many Christians, many secular Egyptians, and moderate Muslims. And so there's a lot of animus, there's a lot of misunderstanding why United States government, and they say, they make it clear that they're not against the United States people, the American people, but they're against what the United States government is doing right now in Egypt.
The Brotherhood is very well organized, as you know, Chris. Is there a chance of a real full-blown civil war, or will the military take control and arrest people and quiet things down?
I think the military is trying to do that right now by arresting Mohammed Badi and the other members of the Muslim Brotherhood. But I'm not sure we're going to see a civil war in the sense like you can see in Lebanon between Sunni and Shiite. The people I talk to say they do expect violent backlash, but not the kind of civil war. One thing that's happened, I think, in the past year is many people have been disillusioned with the kind of Islam, the kind of Muslim theology that's espoused by Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood. So I don't expect a full-blown civil war, but many people do some sort of violent backlash in the next few weeks or months. It remains to be seen how the Muslim Brotherhood is going to react, whether they're going to accept to go back into the political process or perhaps launch a violent intifada like some people have done, for example, in Algeria that lasted for more than a decade. We'll see. It remains to be seen what's going to happen, how they react to what's going on right now.
Last question. How bad was it for Christians during the reign of the Brotherhood? What did they do to them?
Well, in a word, Pat, they said it was a nightmare. They said it was horrible. The spokesman for the Catholic Church said that Christians were treated not just as second-class citizens, but fourth-class citizens. Many Christians have also been targeted. There was a Coptic priest who was killed in Sinai a few days ago. There were some churches that were burned in Luxor. But one thing I've heard from Christians is they say what's happened here is a result, in many part, because of prayer. And they say don't underestimate the power of prayer. And what Christians are telling me is that they want Christians around the world to be praying for Egypt at this time, be praying for the church at this time, be praying for the gospel at this time, because many people have been open in the last couple of years to the gospel like never before. So they say it's a very fruitful time of spiritual harvest, but they're asking that people would pray for them.
Chris, thank you. Stay safe, my friend. God bless you.
Hello and welcome back to the Middle East Report. That was an excellent news clip produced by CBN 700 Club and the Jerusalem Bureau Chief, Chris Mitchell in particular. Mervyn, I just really want to bring you into this one because, you know, we've seen historical events unfold over the last few weeks in Egypt. But one thing I've been really surprised, and that report indicated there from CBN, was the fact, the position and the reaction of the US government, by the British government, of the EU to this new revolution in Egypt. And anyone would give the impression that here was a fully democratically elected president, as in President Morsi, who was elected by the Egyptian people, and how the military junta have overthrown this new president, and he hasn't served his 3 terms in office. We've had also discussions by John McCain, who was the former Republican presidential candidate in 2008 who ran against President Obama, saying from the Republican Party that the US government should suspend its £1.3 billion in US military aid to Egypt so they reinstall the Muslim Brotherhood to power. Why have our Western leaders got it so wrong?
Well, you know, let's. You've got to recognise that, of course, we were all calling for democracy in Egypt. Everybody in the world wanted to see democracy. We thought we saw free and fair elections, and we did see free and fair elections as far as electioneering and the whole apparatus of elections goes. But what I think the West has failed to recognise is that there were only one group in Egypt that were organised enough to fight an election. This came so soon after the revolution. The only group of people that were organised were the Muslim Brotherhood, and so civil society didn't have Christian representation. You know, I visited the old Pope Shenouda, just before he died 18 months or so ago, and you know, he always discouraged Christians from being involved in civil society. He discouraged Christians from getting involved in the political scene as such. So Christians certainly weren't organised, but then neither were the liberal Muslims. They weren't either. And we're probably talking with liberal Muslims and with Christians, we're probably talking about 73% of the population are people that are not Islamists in any way. And so and of course the Muslim Brotherhood propagated this myth during the election that in fact if you were Muslim you had to vote for the Muslim Brotherhood. There was no other alternative, and so people did, and particularly out in the outline, in the countryside, in the rural areas, elderly people were voting for the Muslim Brotherhood, but they didn't want Islamism, and that is what they got. What I think we've seen in the last few days is this belief that the world believing, great, at last we've got some democracy in Egypt, not recognising that President Morsi in fact was going against democracy, was taking back, he was using democracy to grab power for himself and for the Brotherhood. But what has happened is the people have spoken again in a much more powerful way, actually, than by the ballot box. And of course, this will result in other elections where other groups will be better organised. But what the West failed to recognise initially, and of course, nobody likes a military coup, and we don't want to support military coups in places. But what they failed to recognise, this was the military stepping in response to what the people wanted. I do think over the days since that second revolution, if you like, and incidentally, I remember Pastor Sameh Morris, who was on that clip from the Castle Deborah Church in Cairo. I remember visiting him soon after the revolution in 2011. He said to me, "You haven't seen the revolution yet. That will come further down the road when we have an Islamist government and the rest of the population rises up." That's what we're seeing. That was very prophetic. And I think that the UK and the US and the European governments are beginning to see that. Only this week, a US envoy, William Burns, went to Cairo and he said the Egyptian people have been given a second chance. But there are people still calling this a coup. They're wrong, and we need to get behind the Egyptian people and make sure that Egypt is handed back to all of the people to bring about true democracy and religious freedom.
Absolutely. And Pastor Waggy, I want to bring you on this one, primarily because I've been personally so shocked by the kind of Western media coverage of this revolution in Egypt. Firstly, by presenting this revolution as a military coup, ignoring the fact that 30 million Egyptians took to the streets to protest against President Morsi. There's been no questions as to who are the Muslim Brotherhood, what are their views, what are their opinions, what do they stand for, what's their political ideology and religious ideology. They never discussed why the people were protesting against President Morsi in terms of the Islamicization and the political marginalization of Christians, secular Egyptians and also liberals, and horrified by the extent that he wanted to declare himself pharaoh and suspend democracy in Egypt. And also then having the representatives of the Muslim Brotherhood on to make it look like they're a victim. Now, surely if we are going to support true democracy in Egypt and in the Middle East and true liberty, isn't it important that our TV news stations gets the real picture and the real truth, and how important is accurate news coverage of these events?
Actually, as Mervyn was saying, the Muslim Brotherhood were the only or the main group organized, but the question is organized by which money? The problem was or the main problem in the Middle East is not only in Egypt, but in the Middle East as a whole. If you look at what's happening in Syria today, which is disaster, that's all supported by or financed by the West. The agenda behind what's happening is threatening not only to the Middle East, but even to the UK, the USA. Because when you, the history is saying how the West was supporting the Islamic groups in political umbrella, but not understanding the plan or the different plan in the Muslim groups' mind, especially like the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is not only an Egyptian organization, it is an international organization. And the head office used to be in London. So, and still there is a big part they are playing in England. And the international committee of the Muslim Brotherhood met in Turkey just 2 weeks ago and discussing the situation in Egypt. Before that, they met in Brussels. So they still, planning for everywhere. So I think the West has to wake up and understand this dangerous happening in the Middle East is coming to here if we keep silent or if we supported this kind of violence. And what happened now in the Western media, when they are very biased with the reality. If you look at what's happening in the different TV channels, inviting just Muslim Brotherhood to give their view about what's happening and ignoring the majority. The Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt now is less than 2% of the population. When you have 98% of the population not interested to have this 2% taking over the country, and the Western media just inviting the 2% and giving them the power as the victims, and they are not.
And we got last news clip of the program to go to. This one says, violent aftermath to Egypt's revolution.
Unrest continued in Egypt on Monday, as at least 51 were killed and more than 400 were injured in clashes between Egyptian soldiers and Muslim Brotherhood supporters. Meanwhile, the diverse coalition of interests that joined with the military to force Morsi's removal from office has already begun to fracture. As different political groups compete for political influence, violence and instability will continue to reign in Egypt. The military will work with its new interim president, Adli Mansour, to try and restore order to the country, but it will face numerous challenges. The clash between the army and the Muslim Brotherhood supporters happened outside a Republican Guard facility in the Nasser City district of Cairo, which has been a locus of pro-Morsi support during this entire episode of political upheaval and popular unrest. It is unclear what instigated the clash, with both sides blaming the other. Ultimately, though, the precise sequence of events is immaterial. The reality is now that such violence undermines the military's roadmap for Egypt's political future and is worsening an already tense situation. The most notable fallout thus far from the incident is that Egypt's second-largest Islamist group, the Salafist Al-Noor Party, has announced that in response it will withdraw from discussions about the formation of a new interim government in Egypt. The withdrawal comes after Al-Noor said on Sunday that it opposed the appointment of Mohammed El-Baradei as vice president. Al-Noor had originally been a part of the coalition that endorsed the military's actions on July 3rd, but that unity is already fraying at the seams. In response, the National Salvation Front, a conglomerate of secular opposition parties coordinated by Mohammed El-Baradei, has condemned the violence, and Egypt's interim president Adli Mansour has ordered the formation of a judicial committee to investigate the episode. These measures by themselves, though, will not be able to quell the significant backlash to the military's actions and this most recent incident of violence. The Freedom and Justice Party, the political wing of the Muslim Brotherhood, has also condemned the violence. In a statement, the group called for a general uprising in Egypt and for the international community to intervene to prevent what it called future massacres. That said, it is important to keep in mind that the Brotherhood is not looking for an armed conflict. The group's inflammatory rhetoric is in keeping with a strategy that will try to force the Brotherhood's opponents to negotiate with it and offer political concessions that will allow the Brotherhood to save face. But such statements do not happen in a vacuum, and there are forces in Egypt that will try and capitalize on this kind of instability and rhetoric. Some elements of the Brotherhood and other Islamist groups could be radicalized by the recent coup, seeing it as evidence that engaging in mainstream politics is ineffective. As if to underscore this point, the Brotherhood's Cairo headquarters were ordered closed today by Egypt's prosecution after security officials claimed to have found a significant cache of weapons. There have also already been multiple security incidents in the Sinai Peninsula since the July 3rd coup, including the bombing of a natural gas pipeline connecting Egypt to Jordan on July 6th and multiple attacks on military checkpoints. The Muslim Brotherhood will continue to try and pressure the military and its transitional government by maintaining its presence in the streets. This strategy will continue to bring pro-Morsi supporters into close contact with the military and security forces, making clashes such as the one today increasingly more likely, and will also give radical elements in Egyptian society an opening to engage in more serious violence. Such violence will also put pressure on the various political constituencies that united in their dissatisfaction with Morsi, and will undermine the military's attempts to restore a semblance of stability to Egypt.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Mervyn, we have to say, does the collapse of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt bring hope that if the West truly gets behind the people of Egypt, the small number of 30 million people, including 8 million Christians, and backs this new government, surely this could actually lead to the defeat of Islamism throughout the world? Certainly political Islam, that want to impose a Sharia law, establish the Islamic Caliphate throughout the world, because the Egyptian people have come to realize there's a difference between Islam and Islamism.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm quite excited, and I think this really is. There's been a lot of talk over the last 18 months of the Arab Spring being a winter of disaster, actually, but I believe there is great hope, not just for Egypt, but for the Middle East. Because Egypt is not the only country where large proportion of the population do not want Islamism. The young populations in places like Iran don't want to see Islamism. So if we can back what's happening in Egypt, and if we can back free and fair elections, which we trust and hope and pray will produce a government for all of the people of Egypt, which is not Islamism, but is democracy, I think there's great hope, not just for Egypt, but for the region as a whole.
And we're down to 2 minutes of the programme, sadly, gentlemen. And Pastor, Waggy, what we've seen in Egypt now is an incredible hope. But, as our viewers here watching this in Britain, how can we get behind our Egyptian brothers and sisters in Christ like you and just really give them the voice that they need and the support they need?
First, I will say we need a lot of prayers and as well awareness to your local MPs, your colleagues, and telling them the view or the right to the Egyptians to survive and to have a better life than it was, and as well protecting the Christians, and even to protecting everybody by asking for the country in Egypt, for UK, for the USA, not to have a religious regime taking over everywhere.
Gentlemen, I just want to thank you so much for joining me on this Egypt special, the Middle East Report. It's been an excellent contribution. Thank you. And just want to thank you all for watching today's programme. And let's take the advice of Pastor Waggy and let's pray for the Christians in Egypt, and let's be vocal that we need to contact our MPs and our political representatives to let them know that Christians living here in Britain and the West demand that our governments actually stand up and support our fellow Christians in Egypt and throughout the Middle East. And we've got a song to go to now that pays tribute to the excellent work being carried out by Christian Solidarity Worldwide in highlighting the persecutions of Christians in Egypt.